women, we take on the responsibility for everything, right? As women in our relationships, if you're a mom, we tend to kind of take over the reins in that area. And I think in order to really get through this, we have to grant ourselves some grace. We have to cut ourselves a break. And everything may not be perfect and everything may not look the way that we would like for it to look. I think for many of us, we're experiencing a sense of loss and grief right now. 2020 was the year of vision. Everybody's gonna have 2020 vision. Everybody had all these plans, right? And none of us planned for a global pandemic, right? How can you plan for a global pandemic? It's not gonna happen. So I think all of us are kind of grieving this idea of what we thought this year might look like. And I think we just have to be okay with that and really be flexible and give ourselves a break. Every day is not going to look the same. Some days are going to look different. Some days will go really well. Other days, things may not go as planned, but we have to really kind of get comfortable with being okay with that, cutting ourselves some slack and not punishing ourselves, which as women, we tend to do a lot. We tend to be really hard on ourselves. So I think the more we can embrace the idea of just being graceful, just acknowledging how we're feeling and just kind of moving through that, the better off we'll be. But I think more than anything, we've got to do our best to stay positive about the efforts that we are making to be our best selves every day, just showing up.
Yeah, I love that. And Racy?
Yeah, I agree with what I agree with what Rhonda has said. I add that we still have to make time for ourselves. We can't leave the home. We can't do our normal self-care things like get a massage, go to lunch with friends, go to the cases, but we can still do things like go in your car and sequester yourself for a few hours. You can still go for a drive, you can go for a walk, get out of the bathroom and just have that time for yourself to take a long bath, listen to music, relax, FaceTime with friends, whatever it is. This is a really hard time for relationships because you are stuck together all day long. And even the best relationships, I think, are being tested because there's a lot of uncertainty around how this pandemic is going to play out. What is the normal going to look like when we're able to come back outside? What is outside going to look like? I don't think that as a society, we can go back to how things were after this. And so that means that the basic sort of form of being, which is human relations, that has to change as well. It's a good time to work on things like communication, routines, but again, and all that is because it's going to change once this ends. And as it continues to unfold, there are going to be more changes. So, excuse me, I think acceptance is a very big part of it. Accepting that this is happening, whether we like it or not, it's happening. It's scary, it's uncertain, it's always changing. There's a lack of really vision, but that's just a part of it. We have to figure out how to keep ourselves sane, how to continue to care for our families and our partners and ourselves, but remembering that if we're not okay, nothing else is going to really happen well. You can't give from an empty cup. You have to keep finding ways to pour into the care of yourself despite all that's happening externally.
And what are some tactical ways to do that? I'm currently receiving life coach and life coaching. And my life coach will always say something like, well, you can choose to feel differently. And I'm like, oh, can I? Can I choose to feel differently? What are some tactical strategies to kind of, grieve this period that we're in that feels so surreal, but that still requires us to show up in our lives?
I think what's really important is starting with the idea that we're not in full control. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think what's really important is accepting the idea that we're not in control of everything. For many of us, we feel like we're in control of what our day is going to look like. We're in control of what the year is going to look like. We're in control of what's going on at work. We're in control of what's going on with the kids and their schedules. We've got everything down. But I think it's really critical now more than ever to have an understanding that we really don't have control over all of that. That being said, there are certain things that we do have control over. So one of the things that I suggest is, there's maybe some days where you feel like you don't have control of anything, but you do have control of your breath. You have control in terms of whether or not you're breathing, if you're participating in deep breathing activities, if you choose to, let's say, meditate, and or if you choose to pray, if you choose to take a step outside and just get some fresh air. Those are some choices that you can make for yourself every day, and that typically you're able to control. So I think just kind of accepting that we cannot control for every factor in every situation. We cannot control what happens tomorrow, but instead focusing more on what we can do in this moment for ourselves, what we have control over, and what will really benefit us over the long haul in terms of our physical wellness and our mental wellness.
I love that. When you said breath, I thought you meant like you can decide to brush your teeth, and that's why I started laughing.
No.
But deep breathing is
breath.
also great.
You're breathing, yes. Deep breathing, yes. And it's funny because deep breathing has actually been shown to increase your life expectancy as well. So breathing is, of course we're all breathing, but really being strategic about making sure that you're taking deep breaths each day can actually extend your life. So it's really important, and that's something that we can do just for like a few minutes each day at any time of day. So I think that's really helpful.
That's great. Racing?
Yeah, I actually agree with your life coach about that. I think that they probably try to simplify what could be a complex idea around being intentional and purposeful, right? So the idea that you can choose to be happy, you can choose my circumstance, I'm going to be happy, I'm going to decide to have a good day or have a positive outlook. But that means that you're consciously and purposely setting your mind and setting your intentions to that idea. And it can be hard when things are stressful. It can be hard when the kids are screaming, your husband's nowhere to be found, everything's a mess, and you just want to take a shower. But you can decide that I can look at this as a problem or an opportunity. It can be that this time of being sequestered and being quarantined can be really good quality family time. It can be a really good time to catch up with one another in a way that you aren't able to do when you have the functional routine of work, school, family, kids, whatever the case is. So that the premise behind choosing, to be happy is really about realizing that A, it can be worse. B, you don't need to be perfect to be happy, right? You can make do with temporary. It's going to end at some point, and you're going to be back in a place of having more control over what happens. So it's not as simple as like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to have a good day. But it is as simple as, regardless of what happens, I'm going to make sure that I smile and hug my kids. I'm going to make sure that we have fun, even if getting them to do schoolwork is a problem. There is a level of control you have over how you let these things impact you and how you let them manifest in the rest of your day beyond that bad moment or difficult moment.
And we have a question in the chat. I agree that you can choose, but how do you honor the stress and grief and frustration that is there at the same time, or do you not do it at the same time?
No, I don't think it has to be an either or. I think it can be a both and. So I think you can take some time, whether you're in the shower or when you're alone cooking, and have that breakdown. You can cry. You can cry, you can pray, you can call your mom and vent to her, you can call your best girlfriend and talk to her about it. And then you can decide that when that moment is over, I'm going to go intentionally being happy. So something I tell clients to do a lot is set a timer. If you find yourself crying or feeling bad or having an angry moment, give yourself 10 minutes to have that feeling play out. Give it a range of emotions, behavior, whatever, if you're by yourself. And then when the timer goes off, you set your mind to changing that, to, making yourself happy in some way, eating something indulgent, putting on music that whatever it takes to shift to the next and choose to be happy despite your circumstances.
I love that because, I think part of the challenge too is we want to skip over that step. So we want to skip over the step of grieving and we just kind of want to get over it and move on. But more than anything, you have to allow yourself to actually feel the feelings for at least a few moments. And I think the mistake that we make is we try to skip over that step and just push through and move on. But I think if you're able to set aside time, I know I have many clients that some are still working and they're breaking down every day. Many are healthcare workers. So they're having a really rough day at work, right? Because they're seeing patients with COVID-19 and they're dealing with that at work. in between them coming home to the kids and spouse, they're breaking down in their cars. But my thought with that more than anything is like, allow yourself to break down in the car. You absolutely have the right to do that. Give yourself a moment to gather yourself, to process your feelings, process what you're thinking and you're feeling by yourself. And then once you do that, typically it's easier for you to move on because you've allowed yourself to feel the feelings.
Something that's come up is this idea of like needing strategies to know how to communicate what your needs are, and more so how to actually make those needs be heard and acted on. So what are some strategies that we can do to have better communication with our partners?
So I think one of the things when we're talking about communication that's really important is we have to be clear with ourselves what it is that we want. And sometimes we think that we're clear and we have an idea, but I really encourage my clients to write everything down and be very deliberate about everything. So, the first step is really being able to categorize and write down exactly what it is that you're needing, right? What is it that you're missing or you're lacking? Reviewing that, because sometimes we're looking for our partners to provide us with things that technically they may or may not be able to provide us, right? For any number of different reasons. Sometimes we're looking to our spouse for happy. So I think it's important to really write that list down first and review, is it really realistic to expect your partner to contribute in those different areas? So really being clear about what you want first. And once you do that, when you're able to communicate with your partner, it makes it a lot easier because you're clear. And ideally, you're not having these conversations when you're already upset, angry, sad, mad. You're having the conversation when, tempers are cooled, everybody's calm, and you're in a decent space where you're able to hear each other. So I think we also have to be a bit strategic about communication, because sometimes we're trying to communicate, from our heart, what's going on deep down in our gut when we're in the middle of a yelling match. Strategically, your partner's probably not going to be able to hear anything that you're saying. Even if you have, even if your arguments are accurate, even if everything you're saying is true and you're pouring your heart out, that's typically not going to be the best time for you to have that kind of conversation. So I think just being very clear, deliberate, and specific about what it is that you want, and also to just being strategic about when you're bringing that up to your partner. But we've got to be clear, and sometimes we have to really be clear about what we want and does it really make sense? Because once you see it on paper, you might feel differently.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that every couple will come into therapy saying they need to work on, and I always challenge what that means, because it's impossible to not communicate. Even if you're giving silent treatment, that's a form of communication. If you're yelling and cursing and walking away, that's communication, right? So what's happening most often is that you are in the right conversation at the right level of communication. Maybe you're keeping things very surface because you don't want to trigger each other and you don't want to have a bigger fight. Maybe you're, like Rhonda said, you're having the discussion at a really inopportune time that isn't productive and allowing you to truly express or convey what it is you're feeling. So I would challenge clients to take some risks and try different things in terms of communication. Maybe it's about time of day. Maybe it's the mood you both are in. Have you both eaten? Are either of you tired? Are you not in the right frame of mind for this particular discussion? Are the kids around? Is work stressful? So discussing this right now isn't really ideal. You have to really be, like Rhonda said, strategic about when you're having the conversation, what you're discussing, and if you're really being vulnerable, right? Being vulnerable means taking risks with your partner. It means being willing to try new things, even if in the past they didn't work, even if it feels like this is gonna blow up my face, or it's really hard, or I don't want to say that thing. If you can't have those hard conversations, you're gonna find yourselves doing more of the same and really getting nowhere. So it's really about how comfortable or safe is it for either of you to really have the right conversation in the right way and be productive.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Oh, sorry, I'm having some feedback issues.
Okay, that's better. So with communicating, there are sometimes instances where you feel like you need a mediator, that you can't quite navigate that conversation without someone stepping in. Can you guys talk about how to work with a couples therapist during this time, what that looks like, and how to get your partner on board with that if they're reticent?
So there's always one partner that is less enthused being in therapy, to put it very, very lightly. Right? It's usually one person's idea, and they sort of drag the person, by their neck to therapy. I would say that therapy, first and foremost, process. It's going to take time, and couples therapy usually feels worse before it feels better. It's not going to look like what you might see on TV or in the movie of we go to a few sessions, now we're smiling and laughing and everything's good. Look like when you leave here, you're gonna probably every time, do I still want to be with this person? Why am I in this relationship? Why am I in this marriage? So I always encourage couples to have some routine, have something that you do after session that allows you from the therapeutic space to being a couple again. Whether it's you do therapy or you don't discuss anything that happened in therapy for 3 hours or 3 days, whether it's a conversation in the car until you get home, some is your sort of like vehicle to go from this really intense space where things are being, old instances are being brought up, old feelings are being brought up, to now I can live with you and be with you in a healthy space and not respond to happened in that. You have to also be open to trying out a few different therapists. You may not find the right therapist the first time you go to see somebody. So think dating, where you want to find the right person that makes both of you feel safe and makes both of you feel comfortable. If you feel like the therapist is taking sides, it's not the right therapist for you. If you feel like the therapist is talking more about themselves or their own marriage more than yours, it's not the right therapist for you. It has to be someone who's neutral, someone who can be balanced and make both of you feel like this is a space where your ship can grow and change. The client and couples therapy isn't either of you, your relationship as a whole and the two of you as a unit. So that should be what the feeling is. You should feel like there are people who, like there are times when she's on his side or your side. It should feel like there are times when you're in the hot seat and he or she's in the hot seat. It shouldn't always be one person, because every relationship is about what both people put into it. It's never one person's fault. It's always the role that both of you are playing and what both of you are contributing to the relationship.
I agree with that 100%. I agree with that. The only other thing I was going to add too is that, I agree that what's challenging with couples therapy more so than anything is that oftentimes there's one person who's really gung-ho and excited, right? And then the other is maybe not so much. And at the end of the day, even if your partner does choose to participate in couples therapy, which is great, there's still a level of participation that they're going to have to engage in, right? So it's going to be more than just them showing up for the session. They've got to be willing to do the work with you, because relationships are, there's two people in the relationship and they're going to have to do the work. So I also think really setting those expectations up front is really important. And typically your therapist will do that with you. But I think it's also important to prepare your partner for that. Like, it's going to be more than just, okay, I'm going to come and sit in the session, but they actually need to be able to be open, honest, vulnerable, and participate in sessions, and then also participate between sessions. So that way, ideally, you'll see some progress in your relationship. It's hard work. Yeah. It's hard work.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because the work doesn't happen in therapy. The work happens when you leave therapy and when you're able to apply what you've learned in session to your real life. Like I always tell clients that therapy is like an oil change for your car, right? You have to still drive 50,000 miles on your car after that tune-up happens. It's not like you come to session and a magic wand gets waved and now everything is good. You can be in therapy every single day of your life, but if you leave and do nothing different, nothing's going to change. You have to really be committed to what happens once you leave that office and you go back to you two just being a couple and the issues that you're facing every day. So what do you have to do differently with your behavior? How do you have to speak to each other differently? Those are the things that really create the bigger changes that people really get out of therapy. And you have to remember that therapy isn't always the right answer. it's not always the right time to go to therapy. And therapy may not be the intervention that you need at that moment in your marriage. It may be something else that you haven't identified yet. So sometimes going to therapy can be what helps you realize that going to therapy isn't what you need at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And you can figure out something else to do until therapy becomes the right choice.
Can you guys talk a little bit more about that? This is like the first time I've ever heard that, because like therapy is kind of used as like, oh,
the
therapy.
default. Yeah.
Yeah, like therapy. What are the other options? And then I have like 2 really good questions about finding a therapist right now.
I mean, I think it really depends on the situation. So in some cases, I see a lot of folks that are reaching out for couples therapy, and it's really clear that they actually need individual therapy. So that's an example. You know, sometimes there are deeper mental health issues that are going on. There's a lot of trauma, and trauma is something that's so incredibly common. It's not something that we talk about much, you know, on a media level or on a public level, but the impact of trauma is significant on our mental health. And so for some folks, they've experienced a lot of trauma in their lives, whether as kids or, you know, up into young adulthood, and that impacts their ability to be able to communicate. It impacts what their relationships look like. It can impact work. It can impact so many different areas. And, you know, on the surface, it might look like, oh, I'm having these, you know, intense marital problems and we need couples therapy. That could be the case, but it could also be that maybe there's one partner who actually needs to process their trauma through individual therapy. So that's a very common, I would say I get that more than anything, is that someone will present for couples therapy when in reality, they actually need individual therapy to work on some of those things first, maybe couples therapy down the road once they start to process some of those issues. The other thing that comes up frequently too are medical issues that can sometimes look like mental health issues or other things, and especially if with men, because, you know, when we're talking about depression, anxiety, and other things, that can look very different in women versus what that looks like in men. And on top of, there are some actual medical diagnoses that will have kind of like the same symptoms, and you'll see some of the same behavior, but it's actually a medical issue that's happening, not even necessarily a mental health issue. So like diabetes, I mean, there are several different diagnoses where it can look like something else. It can look like depression or something else, but it's actually a medical diagnosis. So a good rule of thumb is to rule out any medical issues up front. So if you or your partner aren't used to, and I mean, I know we're limited right now, but if you or your partner aren't used to kind of like getting regular physicals or checkups, I always strongly encourage that, because you want to be sure that everyone's kind of clear and okay and on the medical side, before we really start to delve deep in terms of what other mental health issues are going on and with relationships. Another tip I'll tell you too, if you have a partner that's very leery about receiving services or getting therapy situation, you can kind of, I don't want to say use, but you can kind of go the medical route, which for some people they are more receptive to. So again, some of the symptoms like trouble sleeping, you know, changes in your eating habits, different things may come up mental health wise. Sometimes you can go the medical route first. As I mentioned, you want to rule out the medical. And if there's nothing medically going on, typically a doctor will encourage some kind of mental health, some kind of therapy on that end as well. So if you have a partner that is just kind of averse to doctors, therapists, everyone across the board, sometimes that's another roundabout way to bring them back around to potentially getting individual therapy and or couples therapy somewhere down the road. So it's just another strategy you might be able to use.
Yeah. What are some questions to ask a therapist right now to kind of gauge if they're a good fit?
I think first and foremost, you want someone who is actually a therapist, someone who is licensed and is trained in couples work or in psychotherapy, period, right? There are a lot of people out there that say they're doing therapy. Excuse me, my allergies are really bad. People who say they're doing therapy but really have no basis in therapeutic training whatsoever. So they should be able to give you their license information, their educational information, all that stuff you can Google and verify if it's accurate or not. You want a therapist who who has some experience in working with you as a couple. So that means any other identifying factors that you two may have, whether it's race, religion, sexual identity, backgrounds, someone that knows what they're doing. There is a level of learning that has to happen because you are an individual couple. So I can know everything about couples who are Mormon, but I have to know what Mormonism looks like for you as a couple, right? But setting up what that culture is like, or what those rules and regulations are like in your cultural identity, there's going to be a lot of time of me catching up and not so much work with helping you move forward. You want a therapist who's available. A lot of therapists will do intakes with you and then have you waiting for months to be seen again. That's not going to work with couples therapy. You need it to be consistent. You need it to be regular. So if a therapist can't offer you a recurring or a set session schedule, that can be a red flag as well. The other thing you want to think about is cost. Therapy can be expensive. It's definitely an investment, and you have to decide whether or not you can afford that long term, because again, couples therapy takes time. I think a good 3 or 4 months at minimum therapy. So there are all these factors around time, around scheduling, costs. You also want a therapist that you can feel like you relate to in some way. Again, goodness of fit, in my opinion, is the biggest factor in therapy possibly being successful. If you're uncomfortable, if you feel like this person's judging you, if you feel like you don't understand what they're saying because they're using all this therapeutic language and not speaking to you like you're a real person, that's going to happen the entire way through therapy. Mm-hmm. So you want a therapist who's willing to collaborate with you, someone that you can say, you know what, that doesn't really fit for us. Can you give us something else to try? Or we did that homework, got nothing out of it. What else can we do? Someone who's willing to have a give and take. If it's really like, this is my therapy office where I say goes, you do it or don't come back, or whatever the case is, that doesn't feel good. We're still human beings, even though we're therapists. We're still people that have relationships and spouses and children, and there should be a human to human connection before anything else. So definitely training and certification, licensure, all those things, definitely availability, cost, access. Those are the most important things, I think, when it comes to couples therapy or therapy in general.
Yeah. So for parents who are single, separating, divorcing, this is like alone time in a lot of ways. Like you don't have that that partner to bounce off of, even if they're driving you crazy. There's you're alone in a lot of ways, even if your kids are with you. So how do you process those feelings of loneliness without letting it take over?
You know, I think again, it's taking good care of yourself is really important. And I think for everybody on the planet at this point, because of what we're going through. So I think one of the best things that we can do right now is taking really good care of ourselves. And that can look different for each person. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the practices that I utilize and that I encourage my clients to utilize is mindfulness through grounding. So I love to go outside. And I use that time to just stop and be still. Even if you, let's say you can't go outside, even if you have a window that you can crack and you can open and you can hear what's going on outside, I think just really stopping to take a breath and just to listen to the different sounds that you can hear and being still, that can be incredibly powerful. And I know meditation is one of those things that I think people almost feel like they have to have some kind of perfected idea or concept of what meditation looks like. I have to have a candle. I have to have a particular outfit on. I have to, be burning incense or whatever. It doesn't really have to be all of that at all. It can be simply opening a window and listening to the sounds that you hear outside, whether it be cars, whether it be nature, whatever it may be. But I think that grounding and mindfulness is incredibly important because we are getting so many different messages from all over the place, from the media, from, family members. We're getting text messages. We're trying to catch up on FaceTime and see how everybody's doing and get status updates. We have work. And for entrepreneurs, again, trying to kind of keep your business afloat. We have so much going on. And so it can be easy to slip into feelings of sadness or anxiety or depression. It's very easy. But if you're able to stop and take the time with yourself at least once a day, even if it's 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever you can spare, to be still and to be quiet, a lot of those thoughts and ideas and messages will kind of melt and go away, and you can hear your own voice. And even if your own voice is saying like, hey, I'm worried, or, I'm frustrated, or I do feel lonely, I think just the idea that you can stop and process that separate of everybody else's thoughts, opinions, and ideas is incredibly powerful, because that's how you're able to tackle it and move through it. The more messages and get crowded, and after a while we don't know what our own thoughts and ideas are, and what my sister's thoughts and ideas are, and what my mom says I need to be doing, and what my boss said at work. It's hard to just even hear what you're thinking or what you're feeling. We can't process it if we don't know what it is. I can't process my feelings if I'm not even clear what are my feelings versus my partner's feelings. So I think really just honoring ourselves enough to give ourselves the time to stop and be mindful and be kind to ourselves and graceful through that process can be incredibly powerful.
Love that. I agree with that. And there's another sort of form of grounding that I like to do with clients, which really is about creating a list of like 6 to 10 things that you can sort of hold on to, things that are factual, things that are true, that you can sort of rely on. So when you feel anxious, when you feel lonely or stressed out, if these things remain true, if these things hold fast, you know that you're pretty much okay. And they can be things like, I'm alive and I'm healthy. My children are healthy. We have a roof over our heads. Income isn't a question right now. My bills are paid. Things that you can really bank on, that are more solid and just, again, steadfast and true, so that you're not getting caught up in the expectations or what you desire, right? So what's real? And that helps you focus on your resources, helps you focus on the fact that you're probably doing better than you think you are, but because other things aren't put right, you're focused on all that isn't good, when there's so much good at all times. So just being able to freely say, I'm home with my kids, I don't have to go to work, there's some benefit to that. There's some good in that as well. So I think you also have to ask yourself, are you alone or are you lonely? Because those are two very different things too. And I think that we always equate being single with being lonely, when in reality, it's just that you're alone, but not really lonely. You probably have friends who want to be there for you, that you're keeping at arm's length. You probably have family and other people that care about you and that check up on you and want to really invest in your life and how you're doing. But because you're so focused on, I have to be okay, or I'm single, so I have to be a superwoman, a single parent, that you're feeling like that has to make you alone. So it doesn't have to make you lonely, right? You're alone because you're uncoupled, but you're not necessarily lonely unless you really think about it as a way of focusing on what you don't have versus all that you do have.
Like that, coming from a perspective of abundance, as opposed to sorry, I lost my question. What can you do if your partner isn't helping managing like the added load of running the household 24/7 now? How can you communicate those needs in a way where they're actually being helpful and seeing you for the superwoman you are, but you need some help?
So this question is really, this is challenging, and it really depends on the individual case in terms of, how you might want to approach it. So, for some that are used to staying at home and their partner typically works out of the home, if they're home now, the idea is kind of like, well, great, I have somebody else here. They can kind of help share the load. The only problem with that is, again, we have to look at what's realistic. So for some folks, they're working from home, and depending on their job, they may not be doing much of anything. So they may be pretty much like at home, waiting to hear more from their company about what it is that they need to do. And they're hanging out, they're, watching movies, whatever it is. For other people, this is an incredibly busy season. And for some, it's an even busier season now that they are working from home. So I think more than anything, it's important not to make assumptions on either end. So you don't want to assume that, just because your partner is there all day now, that they've got 4 hours out of the day that they can dedicate to helping around the house. They may or may not have that depending on what their workload looks like, if that still exists. So I think really having really open and honest conversations with yourself and your partner, it's going to require some flexibility on both ends. So, and it may also require, again, being realistic with what they may be able to contribute. So again, we may have an idea of, oh, great, we're going to share everything 50-50 now. That may or may not work. So if that doesn't work, I think just being open to compromising and hearing what your partner's concerns are, getting an idea of what their day really looks like versus just kind of assuming, that they're not busy, really being frank and clear about exactly what their day looks like, being clear about what your day looks like and what it entails. Because again, I think when we have partners who are working outside of the home or doing other things, they make a lot of assumptions about what's going on all day, right? You're hanging out all day, just doing that thing? Of course not. You're swamped, right? You're at home, you're managing different things in the household. There's a lot to that. And sometimes we make assumptions that our partner knows exactly what it takes to run a household. And in many cases, they do not. So again, on your end, I think being really clear and specific about every single thing that you do every day. And especially as moms, I'll tell you, it's easy for us to gloss over what we're doing. It's like, oh, I'm doing this, this, and this for the day. Many times we're doing so many other smaller tasks, especially when we're talking about schools. So if your kids are in preschool or they're in elementary, middle, or high school, filling out forms, making sure the technology is in place for online learning if they're doing that. There are some things that we do as moms that are kind of a little bit above and beyond what partners may even realize is happening. So I think also making sure that before we make the ask to our partner, that we prepare ourselves to receive that help, because it sounds good, but you also want to be sure mentally that you're in a place to really be able to receive the help that they're able to offer, even if it doesn't exactly look like the way you would do it, because your partner is never going to do things exactly the way you do it. So you want to be sure that you're ready for that before you make that ask.
Yeah, I would add that you want to ask yourself, are you allowing them to do the things you want them to do, or are you expecting them to anticipate your needs, and then when they don't act fast enough, you're jumping in and doing it yourself, right? So are you really sitting back and creating the space and opportunity for your partner to do what you need in terms of, helping you and pitching in? Or are you sitting around saying, okay, I want laundry folded in 10 minutes, 5 minutes later, you're folding laundry yourself and complaining about why I'm the only person folding laundry, So like Rhonda said, it's not going to look how you would do it. It's not going to look like your perfect or right way, but it's about them doing it, period, or doing it your way. If you want it your way, then do it by yourself. If you want it done regardless, then create the time and space. You can give boundaries of, by tomorrow, can we make sure the laundry is all folded? Before dinner time, can we clean the bathroom so that we can take showers and get ready for bed with the kids and not have it be a mess? But if it's like someone in the bathroom and you think that you want done in an hour, you don't tell your partner that, and 10 minutes later you're looking in the bathroom, that's on you. And you can't expect someone else to read your mind and know what you want and how you want it. So picking your battles and being clear on and how you want that to be done, I think is really important.
There you go. That's great. And then the last question that I have before I'll open it up to you guys and your questions are, what are some tips for de-escalating conflict in the moment, in conflict in just healthy debate? And then also for those who might be in unhealthy relationships right now, but are being forced to shelter in place with partners that they don't feel safe with.
I think separating physically is a good way to de-escalate conflict. You may need to have just a timeout in the conversation and go to different rooms. Maybe the conversation doesn't have to be a face-to-face. Maybe it can be something that you email back and forth. You can text from different rooms. You can write letters back and forth. You can even sit back to back and not have to look at each other and have a productive conversation. Maybe you sit in the dark so that, again, there's less of that nonverbal or reacting to each other's facial expressions that happens and can muddy a conversation. If you're in an unhealthy or unsafe relationship at this time, you have to really pull on resources that are available to you that could possibly get you again to physically separate. This is a really dangerous time to be in a physically unsafe relationship. And, you know, it's something that I don't think we're giving enough attention to. We're not providing enough explicit resources for, because normally a person can escape by going to work or going to school, or having the partner leave. And so in these cases, if there's child abuse or intimate partner violence, you really want to think about, you know, the extent to which you're comfortable going in order to ensure your safety and your children's safety. And that may mean calling the police. That may mean going somewhere else just to not be in this space because your life is in danger. And that's the reality of it. Another thing you can do to de-escalate is to, again, communicate before the conversation about whether or not now is the right time, whether or not this is appropriate because you are stuck at home and we are all sheltered in place together. Maybe there are things you have to table until we have some flexibility to leave the home and have more freedom. You can write those things down, you can email them to yourself so you don't forget about them, but also get the expression out of your body and not feel tied to, while we're here, let's discuss this thing. You know, safety, emotionally, mentally, physically is always foremost when thinking about things that could possibly lead to conflict and tension in a relationship.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I think, more than anything in those situations, preparation is really the key. So, having a safety plan. So if you do feel like you are physically in harm's way, having a plan, having those resources already available. Sometimes we have the tendency to wait until something happens to then kind of Google or look or search for those resources. So I would recommend just kind of getting those resources ready for yourself now and having those handy and available. So you could try I can see if I can pull it up, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Again, if there is some place that whether, it's a friend or someone else, if you know that worst case scenario, and again, I know it's challenging because of the times that we're in now, but if you know that worst case scenario, if your life is in danger, where's somewhere that you can go safely? Again, planning in advance, just so that way, heaven forbid, if a situation does arise again, you have a plan, you already know what you need to do, you have the resources, and you can get out and make sure that you are safe.
Thank you, guys. This has been really, really helpful. I'm going to open it up to your questions. If you guys have specific questions for Rhonda and Racine, definitely open up now. Oh, Tansy's going to run, but she said that her key takeaway, bye Tansy, was the work happens after therapy, liken it to an oil change, and take the health concern approach to encouraging her spouse to seek individual mental and physical health assessment. So thank you, Tansy.
Yeah, and it's also a good idea to do individual therapy while you're in couples therapy as well, because it can give you, each of you your personal outlet to process what's happening in the couple session. So don't think you have, I think it's good sometimes to do one before the other, especially if you have substance abuse or domestic violence, that you don't want to go into couples therapy while there's active intimate partner violence. But other things going on, you can definitely seek both and do both at the same time. Again, there's going to be questions about access, cost, availability, but most cases you can figure it out.
Yeah, we did that for 2 weeks, and I was like, I had to stop because of cost concerns, but it was helpful for her to get context about who we both were separately before we came together and talked about what was going on in our relationship, because a lot of your past and your to your point earlier about your own trauma informing the way that you show up in your relationship. She needed that one-on-one time with us before we could get to the work.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? If you want to ask anonymously, you can